If you look on page 5 of your bulletin, you'll see that it says my name is Andrea Fleetham. That is in error. I am not Andrea Fleetham. I am Thomas Bushnell. I say that in the hopes that you're now holding your bulletin in your hand. I'm a sly one. And on page 4, you can see an insult. You have all been insulted. I know. I'm not happy about it, but it's what it is. So first some background, and then I'll explain to you the insult, and then we can move on. Many people not native to the Episcopal Church might think that the readings that we read in church are chosen by the preacher or perhaps by Father Mark, our rector. Nothing of the kind. They are appointed by the authority of the Episcopal Church, and the General Convention meets and votes on what they should be. The actual history of the lectionary we use, which you could call the Revised Common Lectionary, Episcopal Edition, goes back to the Second Vatican Council of the Roman Catholic Church, which ordered a revision of the liturgy and of the readings that would be read in church. And the Roman Catholic Church appointed a 3-year lectionary. And they did a fairly good job, with one little asterisk. And in that 3-year lectionary, they use a great deal more scripture than had been used previously by the Roman Catholic Church or by the Anglican Church, at least for the Sunday readings. And the Episcopal Church, along with many, many other churches, said, well, this looks pretty good, we will take this. And so the Episcopal Church borrowed it and made a little tweaks and adjustments here and there and published it. And that's what you would see in the back of the prayer book. Some things intervened between 1976, when that was done, and today. One is that a bunch of Protestant churches all agreed with the Episcopal Church that what the Catholic Church had done was very nice, and they all got together and formed a group and published a thing they called the Common Lectionary, which was not the same as the Episcopal Church's revisions, but it was its own little changes and amendments. And that's how things sat. And then about 15 years ago or so, they got together and they said it's time for a revision of that Common Lectionary. And they published the Revised Common Lectionary, which made some little changes. And then the Episcopal Church said, okay, we will adopt the Revised Common Lectionary, but some of our little changes that we made in the 70s we're going to make again, since you guys didn't do them. But other ones we didn't do. So there's been a lot of fiddling. And the result is now a lectionary that is not the one in the back of your prayer book, but it's similar. I say all this to point back to that moment in the 60s when the Catholic Church was writing what essentially was the basis of all of these different lectionaries, because they did a new thing. They did a thing that had really not much been done ever before, which is they panicked. They panicked at what might happen if congregations heard certain parts of the Bible read aloud in a language they could understand. And this is not the old Protestant nonsense that people would realize that the Roman Catholic Church was wrong. That's not what they were panicked about. The passages which might lead you to think that, they left in. That wasn't the worry. The worry was that you're little children and you can't stand to hear that the Bible is a complex document with some things that are sometimes a little awkward and difficult to wrap your head around. So they kind of snipped those out with their scissors, and they said they weren't suitable and moved on. And the Episcopal Church, mostly borrowing the same things, did the same thing, even though we had never before seen fit to snip pieces out of the very middle of lessons. And so you can see today's gospel lesson, where it says, Luke chapter 10, verses 1 to 11, and verses 16 through 20. When you see a citation like that in church, you should wonder, who has decided that you can't hear verses 12 to 15, and why have they decided it? And then you should go look it up. I have done this for you. These verses were omitted, as I said, by the Roman Catholic Church, as it happens, though sometimes one of the other editors is the one who did it. And in each of those revisions, there was a little adjustment of the boundaries. Nobody is quite sure which verses ought to be removed in the middle. Maybe an extra one, maybe one less, but always Always verses 12 through 15 are omitted. The Roman Catholic Church, if you went down to Incarnation, you'd find that they're allowed to hear verse 12, but they're not allowed to hear verse 16, and so forth. What are these verses? I have them here. It comes right after Jesus says that these 70 missionaries, when they are not received, they should wipe the dust off their feet and say, "Know this, the kingdom of God has come near." And then Jesus continues further instructions or further words to these 70 disciples. These are the words that you have been insulted by being treated as too childish to possibly get your head around. I tell you, on that day it will be more tolerable for Sodom than for that town. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the deeds of power done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago, sitting in sackcloth and ashes. But at the judgment it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? No, you will be brought down to Hades. So those are the verses that you weren't supposed to hear. Probably, the people who do lectionaries never explain why they leave things out, but we can probably guess. They didn't think Jesus should say things like this. They thought this was a little angry. They could tolerate the disciples rejoicing that the demons submit. They could tolerate Jesus seeing Satan fall from heaven to earth, but they couldn't tolerate Jesus saying that the towns that rejected these 70 were not going to fare well, that it was not good for those towns, that famous centers of pagan opposition to Israel were going to be better off than these Israelite towns that had rejected these 70 missionaries. That is what you were not supposed to hear. Now, so I'm going to tell you what I think it means, which is the other reason that one leaves these kinds of verses out. They may have panicked when they put their lectionary together, that priests who had not really been very good preachers at all in the Catholic Church because it had not been very strongly emphasized, would not have any idea what to do and might just make a bad situation worse, who knows. I think one of the things that these verses tell us is that what we do here in church at St. Mark's on July 3rd, 2016 is a matter of life and death. That it matters what we do and how we do it. And that is, in fact, the underlined message at the end of what are careful marching instructions for some early missionaries about how they are to conduct their work. First of all, they are under authority. Jesus does not tell them, I want you to go out into all the towns, heal the sick, preach the good news, organize yourselves and your manner of life however you see fit. Doesn't say that. He doesn't say, organize yourselves however will best suit the gospel. He doesn't say that. He says, this is how I want you to organize yourselves. Now, I'm not going to tell you that those 70 disciples, that we are supposed to organize ourselves exactly the same way those 70 disciples did. The point is, those 70 were given a fairly specific charge and a fairly specific way to go about their work. And Jesus may have fairly specific ideas for us as well. We just don't have him speaking them to us directly. But it still falls upon us to treat ourselves as under authority. It's why we read the lectionary that we have been told we must read, even when it's got some problems. Because we're doing what we're supposed to do. And there's a lot to be said for that kind of attitude. It's the kind of compromise that makes a successful household successful, to begin with. But it's also that we are about serious business. We are about matters of life and death. There are people for whom St. Mark's and the fidelity of this church's way of being that have been saved from death by this place. There are people whose lives have been saved by this place being faithful, being a place where God could be heard and worshiped and obeyed like nowhere else for that person at that time. We do not know most of the time when what we do is a matter of life and death. Sometimes it is, and we never even know the effect we've had on someone who we didn't even know existed, but who saw us or our actions or came through these doors or lit a candle or whatever it was. And our effects can be wonderful and transformative and life-giving, and they can also be harmful. We don't know the consequences of everything we do. I think, ultimately, what's going on with the sad situation of Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum is that they do not receive the 70, and they do not understand that what's going on in their midst is a matter of life and death. It doesn't require heaven to rain down fire for things to go badly. The Roman Empire soon enough made them go badly enough, if what you're looking for is the destruction of these villages. But what somehow they may have missed was the importance of what was going on in their midst. And the disciples, who are the last ones rebuked, not these towns, remember the disciples, these 70, come back, and oh, they're happy. We've got power. This is cool. They're a little juvenile, frankly. And the words that Jesus says to them are, if what you want to see is power, I've seen far more impressive things than that. Get over yourselves. Rejoice that you have been in a position to hear the word. Rejoice that you are being healed, not that you have acquired some great spiritual power. It is perhaps a similar phrase to Paul's quite nice description of seeing to your own life rather than your neighbor's in the letter to Galatians. Take care of yourself, your own spirit, your own morality, your own actions. You are responsible for what you do. You are not responsible for everybody else. These 70 are responsible for how they behave, where they go, whether they go from house to house to get a better dinner, but they are ultimately not responsible for whether the people they come to hear them or not. That is out of their control. But know that it is still a matter of life and death what they do. And it is a matter of life and death what we do.